now joined this morning by the political commentator and CEO of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona, who is in the studio. Morning to you, Albie.
Good morning, Cristo.
How are you this morning?
I'm very well. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Team Harry and Meghan or not?
Ooh, I think my view on this is quite nuanced. I'm certainly not a Harry and Meghan hater. And I have to say, for media which is generally not very sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, they haven't half covered many of the front page of the papers this morning.
They have. I mean, so far apart. But I think, isn't it more the feud that's being covered than actually them themselves? If that makes sense.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the newspapers are highlighting this distance which is between the Sussexes and the Cambridges. But I think what we've all got to remember, I mean, it's all really exciting to focus on feuds, but ultimately what's happened over the Royal Jubilee bank holiday weekend is that the royal family have been reunited. The Queen has met Lilibet for the first time. It's Lilibet's first birthday today. And family reunions are always a good thing, so I think we should stop being so negative about it and just let the royal family get on with it.
I mean, thank you, but as my mother always says, if you haven't got anything nice to say...
Don't say it.
Go and sit next to Cristo. And I'm afraid to say... Look, I loved them. I was so happy when she joined the royal family. I was there, you know, waving my flag on the day of their wedding. I used to do a Meghan update on my programme after they got married. I remember the first time she wore tights, for goodness sake, because, you know...
When was that?
That was when it was Prince Charles's 70th birthday garden party, just after they got married, when she wore the peach number, and she wore tights because that's what the Queen likes. So, I mean, you know, I was on board. I was on board. But now I just find them loathsome. I really do. I find them to be... you're either in the royal family or you're not. You're either working royals or you're not. But what I find quite loathsome is the trying to monetise being royal enough to, well, monetise the situation, to be royal enough to try and make money out of the institution, but not royal enough to work. And I think they have absolutely every right. Don't want to be royal anymore? Well done. Fair play. Get it. Don't be royal anymore. But this sort of half in, half out, we're going to be in it enough to be able to make money and also slag it off, but we're not going to be in it enough to actually do our duty. And that's what I find quite loathsome about it. I also think as well that they've been quite canny in the position that they've put themselves in, because anything... If they don't get top billing, and if they don't have everyone sort of cooing and loving them, if they don't have the Queen wanting to meet Lilibet, if they don't have, you know, a decent position in the church that's decent enough, if they don't have all of these things, they've got the sort of Damocles hanging over the heads of all the other royals, because they will go and give an interview to slag them all off and call them all racist or something, and I think that's really awful.
So I, too, have been very disappointed with Harry and Meghan's behaviour since they left the royal family. When was it now? Just before the pandemic, so maybe February 2020, let's say. And I, too, was a huge fan of the couple when they first got married. I was so excited to see them get married. I'm from a multiracial family. It meant a lot to us that the royal family was becoming more diverse in that way. And what's happened since then has been very disappointing. But I come back to my first point, which is that I think it is a good thing that they're back in Britain. I always say that family breakdown is something which is very tough, and rapprochement is always a good thing. And I think that the royal family, hopefully, if they stick at it, maybe their family relations can get better between the rest of the family and the Sussexes, because I understand that they had a very frosty reception behind closed doors yesterday as well.
Do you think they had a frosty reception?
These are some of the rumours that I'm hearing, is that they had a very frosty reception from some royals. You saw Prince Harry and Meghan speaking to, I think it was the Duke of Kent, also playing around with some of the Phillips and Tyndall children, but apparently there were some other members of the royal family who were none too pleased to see them.
I'm not surprised, though. I'm kind of not surprised, and I think that they shouldn't be surprised themselves that that's the reception that they got. I mean, I have softened my view a little bit, because when I was asked a few months ago, you know, should they come, I said no.
Why?
Because I was worried that they would try and make it all about them, and that they would try and make it a sideshow about them. And also, I do see everything that they do now through the prism of how it can be monetised. And I think that's the danger that they have now. That's always going to be the perception. When you sign up for $150 million from Netflix to make content, well, you're going to mine the royal archives and you're going to mine your relationship with the royals in order to provide that content. Netflix haven't given them that money to not hear salacious details about the royals. Harry's not been given, what is it, 20 million to write a book, unless it's going to be something that's probably going to slag off Camilla. And so when you look at it through that context, I don't know how I feel about them then coming here, because I think, well, is that going to end up in a book? Is that going to end up, you know, are their feelings about a frosty reception going to end up in their next documentary? Do they have the Netflix crew in their house in Windsor where they, you know, film the preparations for them going to the service and then come back afterwards and give interviews to camera about how it all went and what they're feeling? Do you see what I mean? So it's made it all a little bit
I see what you mean, but I guess what I would say in response is, if this is how you're thinking and you don't even know them, have never met them, do you not think that members of their own family have had those same thoughts as well, and came to the conclusion that actually it's better that they're coming back, it's good that we can meet Lilibet, it's good that we can see them, even if there's a possibility that all of that bad stuff might happen, maybe something good can come of this as well, or instead. And I think if the royal family have come to that conclusion, I'm content with coming to that conclusion as well.
Well, yes, but what weight will that conclusion still carry, if Harry then goes on and writes a book and slags off his stepmother?
We don't know that that's going to happen, Cristo. We don't. You don't have a looking glass into the future.
And you know full well. Right, okay.
I do not know what Harry and Meghan are going to do next.
Do you think that if you were a publisher and you offered Prince Harry money to write a book reflecting on his life thus far, you're going to want something new in that book? He's not going to write stuff that we know already. There is going to be something in that book that we don't know. That's 100% fact.
But we don't know what we don't know what we don't know yet, and you're preempting that it's going to be him slagging off Camilla.
So will you,
we don't know that. Publishers strike tens of millions of dollars of deals with famous people around the world all of the time, not necessarily to get things that are salacious. I don't know what's going to be in this, but you might well be right.
So will you reflect on your position? I think we should
save our outrage for once we have read the book, which is yet to be written.
Would you reflect on your position if they did do that? Would you say, actually, you know what, maybe the family offering an olive branch in the way that they have to Harry and Meghan by inviting them to this, maybe that was a bad idea if in months to come it turns out that Harry's going to slag off the family in this book?
I would never advise another family how to deal with their own family relations, but I always think it's better to try and keep relations good between family members.
All right. But do you think the papers have been fair on them this morning?
I think the papers...
On all the royals, in fairness.
I think the papers have reported on Harry and Meghan in the way that we would expect it to be reported upon. They have reflected the distance, which is seems to be between the Sussexes and the Cambridges. They have reflected where they were sitting in St Paul's Cathedral yesterday, and there are also some wonderful pictures to look at, and that really is what all of this reporting on royal events is about. It's about seeing pictures of our royal family, who we all love very dearly. Some people love Harry and Meghan, some people hate Harry and Meghan, but it's got us talking about them, and that's the point of the front pages.
Apologies for another sneeze there. And what there was praise for the Queen on page 7 of the Times today, which you've noticed, for bringing apparently 6 living prime ministers together.
Yes, precisely. So Major, Blair, Brown, Cameron, May, and of course the incumbent Johnson were all at St Paul's Cathedral yesterday, and the Times writes about how it's brought all of the living prime ministers together. One of the comments that I found quite interesting was a comment that Sir John Major made on BBC Radio 4 about saying after his meetings with the Queen when he was the Prime Minister, he used to wish that she was a member of the Cabinet.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Well, because she had such sense, and
she had such sense, such experience, and a real, duty to this country. And I think what this shows is that the Queen really has been a core part of the state of this country for such a long time. If we think her first Prime Minister was Sir Winston Churchill, and her current Prime Minister is Boris Johnson. I mean, she really has seen such a long, amazing and prosperous period of British history where things have undoubtedly gotten better for most people in this country, and in these difficult times it's hard, it's easy to lose sight of that.
I wonder if any of the other Prime Ministers got booed in the way that Boris Johnson did, though.
I think all Prime Ministers in difficult times probably have had parts of time where they've been booed by the public. If I think back to when Theresa May was dealing with the Grenfell Tower crisis, I think that was in 2017, wasn't it? I remember she was booed quite heavily when the Queen went to go and visit, the Prime Minister went to go and visit afterwards, and she was booed quite heavily then. But look, I'm not going to sit here and say it's a good thing that Boris Johnson was booed at St Paul's Cathedral yesterday. Patently it wasn't. The Prime Minister's in a very difficult situation at the moment, and I think next week is probably going to be the beginning of a couple of difficult weeks for him.
But I said at the top of the programme that Theresa May getting booed, Tony Blair getting booed, perhaps, over Iraq, which I'm quite sure
that
he was
happened
on many occasions. I'm quite sure we could go through that entire list of Prime Ministers and find occasions where they've been booed. The difference I feel with Boris Johnson being booed is that he's being booed for the content of his character, not for policy. And I think that that's far more difficult because he's a liar. I mean, he lies outright about pretty much everything. And I think that when you've done that, it's very difficult to come back from, number one. But number two, these are royalists, these are monarchists, these are the people, you can't call this, you know, a Grenfell, Iraq, any of the examples I've given, you could quite easily say, well, look, these are not going to be the typical fans of the establishment to start with. Whereas with Boris Johnson, these are going to be loyalist conservatives.
Christy, I'm really glad that you said that, actually, because a lot of people have been saying, oh, well, this happened in London, we'd expect the Prime Minister to be booed in London. First point, 12 years ago he was the Mayor of London and he was a very popular politician in London, so that's a huge fall from grace if we're going to take that argument to its logical extent. And the second point is, people travelled from all around the country to come to London yesterday and for this whole weekend to see the Queen. These are monarchists, royalists, Conservative voters, if you will, and you would not be expecting them to boo a Conservative Prime Minister. And this is all happening in the backdrop of the MPs having gone back to their constituencies, being at street parties, talking to their constituents, hearing their feelings, if we think that 59% of Britons in polls want the Prime Minister to resign. So I think this weekend could be quite tricky for the Prime Minister. If the MPs are coming back to Westminster next week, having heard everything from their constituents over the weekend, and more of them might be thinking perhaps it's time to put in a letter to Sir Graham Brady.
OK, well, we'll reflect some more on this coming up here on Talk Radio. It's Cristo with Early Breakfast live from the Talk Radio studio. This is Talk TV. Morning, how are you? It's Cristo here on Talk TV, still joined in the studio by Albie Amankona, who is political commentator, CEO of Conservatives Against Racism. Dallas has sent me a tweet this morning saying, "Morning, Cristo, call me Little Miss Cynical, but the real reason the Duke and Duchess of Netflix came over is to bolster their increasingly tenuous royal connection. Megabucks wanted to remind everyone her husband is the man formerly known as Prince." Dallas, you're not alone in that. I've seen quite a few branding experts saying actually it's really important that they go to events like this because that's where that shows exactly what you said, their royal connection, and that's where everything comes from. And increasingly they will go to the opening of an envelope if it means that they are shown in the context of the royal family, because it's being royal celebrities, which is kind of what they've become, that actually gets people the most interested in them. Would you say that that's a fair comment?
I would say that Dallas said they were being cynical, and I think that is a cynical take to take. I think it's a fair comment.
It's a fair assumption.
It's a fair assumption, if you will, but we don't know if it's the truth. And I think I prefer to give people the benefit of the doubt, and if they do go milk their royal connections afterwards and have another tell-all interview with Oprah, and this book is what you think it might be, slagging off Camilla essentially, I'll reserve my outrage to them. But I like to think this is the beginning of a rapprochement for Harry and Meghan and the rest of the royal family.
All right, Andy says, I watched yesterday's event on Sky News. They ran the footage of Boris arriving a few times through the event, and cheers had mysteriously vanished, replaced by booing and jeers. The Kay Burley commentary also changed. Boris got cheers but were edited out. I have heard that online a few times, Andy, but the thing is, if you watched it live on the BBC... Well, first, there's a couple of things to say. You have to think about where the positioning of each broadcaster's microphones were, firstly, because I don't think it was all taken from one feed with one mic, which all the broadcasters took it from. So I'm not completely dismissing what you're saying, but I just think that's a factor. But secondly, the reason that I say that is that they showed the arrivals live on the BBC. They were actually interviewing people live on the channel while you could see people arriving in the background. So it wasn't as if that could have been manipulated. And on that live footage, you could hear booing to the point where the BBC person who was interviewing the guests live on the channel remarked the Prime Minister is getting booed, and actually broke off the interview halfway through as the Prime Minister was arriving in the background. So I think that there were boos, but I think that you're probably right, there were some cheers as well. But the fact that there were any boos at an event like that, I don't think there was one other person that got booed. Apart from, I think Harry and Meghan got a few boos as well, actually, but that was it.
Yes, I think Harry and Meghan, from what I saw, got some boos when they were on their way out of the cathedral, but actually on their way in, I think it sounded as though the mics were picking up more cheers. But as for Boris Johnson, and of course Carrie Johnson...
Carrie Antoinette.
Well, if you say so. I think, you know, a lot of the coverage that I saw was of them getting booed, and we had Nadine Dorries coming out yesterday, of course, getting in a bit of a spat with the Times, who reported that they were getting booed, and Nadine Dorries seemed to have heard more cheers, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, OK, just on that as well, Boris Johnson is apparently telling the Tories that without me you will lose the Red Wall. I'm not sure whether I would put the Red Wall down to Boris or whether I would put the Red Wall down to Brexit. And if they replaced Boris with someone who would honour Brexit, and my big fear, by the way, is that that if there was a leadership contest to get against Boris, it would be framed that keep me, keep Brexit. And I think that any challenger to Boris needs to be very careful to say, you know, you will not lose Brexit if you lose Boris, because that's going to be the card he plays without any shadow of a doubt. But what do you think? Do you think that Boris, without Boris, the Tories would lose the Red Wall? Or do you think that a new leader, if they keep to the Brexit ideology, could keep the Red Wall?
I'm not sure I agree with the Johnson allies quoted in this interview about them saying that if they lose Boris, they will lose the Red Wall. In fact, at the moment, if we look at some of the polling across the Red Wall, it's actually very low because of Boris's actions during Partygate. But I do actually think Boris Johnson was a pretty fundamental part of that huge election win that we saw in 2019. This is a historic election win. I think it's the biggest landslide Tory win since Margaret Thatcher. Theresa May wasn't able to do that, precisely. Theresa May wasn't able to do that in 2017. Cameron wasn't able to do that in 2015, and certainly not in 2010 because it was a coalition government. And Brand Boris was a big part of that. He had, at least, a way of cutting through to the public that other Conservative politicians just didn't have.
But that was, I think, a fundamental part of that Get Brexit Done. I mean, that amazing three-word slogan. And I don't know. I think that if another politician, the problem is who would replace him, but if they actually could come out with someone who had some new ideas, some conservative ideas, but they were centred around Brexit not being trashed, I think the Red Wall would hold up, because let's not forget that during the recent council elections, Labour absolutely smashed it in London, but they didn't win back many of the seats in the Red Wall in those council elections.
No, they didn't win back many of the seats in the Red Wall in the council elections. I think they did well in parts of Cumbria, but certainly not across the Red Wall.
Not as much as you would expect.
Not as much as you would expect if they were going to
go on and win
the next general election.
A window of hope for any new Tory leader. And I just think Partygate has ruined him in the eyes of the public. He clearly knew what was going on, and he clearly lied to Parliament. I mean, you can't deny that. No one can deny that.
Partygate's definitely put him in a very difficult position. And what Boris Johnson needs to do, if he wants to continue in his role as Prime Minister, is start focusing on the issues that really matter to people and on delivering on the manifesto pledges that we made in 2019. I mean, this week we've got another wacky policy idea. Let's bring back imperial measurements. I mean, do you wonder? Have you ever thought, looked at some packaging on a packet of crisps or some flour and thought, oh, I wish this was in pounds and ounces? No one cares. What people care about, what people vote us in to do, as the Conservatives are, improve public services by making them more efficient, making taxpayers' money go further, reducing taxes, and reforming things that need to be reformed and conserving things that need to be conserved. And I don't think imperial measurements need to be conserved.
Well, firstly, no one was stopping anyone using imperial measurements anyway, and it was just the most ridiculous dead cat being thrown on the table to stray from Partygate. OK, when we come back, we'll explore more of this, including the fate of the Tories, all here on TalkTV. Morning, how are you? Cristo here on Talk TV with you until 7 o'clock. Still joined by Albie Amankona, political commentator, CEO of Conservatives Against Racism. Just looking at the guide to the Jubilee weekend celebrations. Big concert tonight at the Palace. Any of the acts that you're most interested in? It's hosted on the BBC by Roman Kemp, obviously, because Roman Kemp is starting to remind me a little bit of Omicron, because every time you think he's gone, he goes to pop back up somewhere. Platinum Party at the Palace. We've got Queen and Adam Lambert. Fan of those?
I have to say, I don't know that much about Queen.
You don't know that much about Queen?
No, I think it might have been slightly
hit on the radio?
before my time.
Go and listen to Queen immediately.
I'll listen to them on Spotify on the way back home.
Oh, my word. Queen are and were amazing. I mean, it's never going to be the same without Freddie Mercury, but obviously, you know, that ship has sailed, sadly. Duran Duran, do you know them?
I have heard those words.
How old are you, Albie? Am I allowed to ask you that?
Yes, of course, I'm 28.
28. Yeah, you should know about Queen. By 28, you should know about Queen.
I have heard of Queen, I just haven't listened to their music that much.
OK, Sir Rod Stewart?
Yes, I know who Sir Rod Stewart is.
Well, it's loads of people. Andrea Bocelli, Mimi Webb, Sam Ryder.
Sam Ryder, he was our Eurovision person, wasn't
yes.
he? And he did very well. We got to number 2, didn't we, this year?
Celeste, Nile Rodgers and Diversity, and also Craig David, Mabel, Elbow, George Ezra. But, for me, the absolute pinnacle has to be Diana Ross.
Absolutely. Diana Ross, what a legend. I'm really excited to hear Diana Ross sing later on this evening. She'll also be at Glastonbury this year. I think she's doing the Legends slot. And I believe it's her first performance in the United Kingdom for a number of years. So it's a really special event that she's going to be singing at. And I'm really excited to see her sing. And I do know who she is, by the way.
Good. Thank goodness. I'm actually seeing her at the O2 in a few weeks' time, and I can't wait, because I don't know how many more tours she's going to do. Mind you, she might be like Cher, who did at least 5 farewell tours.
Or Tina Turner. I think she's in her 70s now, and she's
I think she's in her 80s now, Tina, but I think she's fully retired now.
But she was touring until very recently.
I would sell my mother to see Tina Turner. Tina Turner's 76. That's Cher. Yeah, I don't think Cher's going to tour anymore. Tina's 82. I don't think Tina's going to tour at 82. Mind you, Madonna, I mean, how old is Madonna now? She must be about 63
She's
next
63,
month.
I think she's in her 60s.
Yeah.
So she's still got some time to go of touring if we follow the other ladies.
Is she 63 already, Madonna? So she's 64 in August. What, is she 64 in August? Madonna is a year away from her bus pass. That's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. All right. Now, of course, we might all be enjoying the Jubilee in London this weekend, but not if you want to buy a pint. And one of the stories you found today is about how much they're costing.
Yes, precisely. So there's this stories in both the Times and in the Mail, and it's talking about how an industry tracking body has found that the cost of a pint in London could raise to £8 due to inflation. But they're the cheapest pipe in the country you can find in Lancashire, which is where some of my family are from, where you can find them on average for around £1.79 for a pint.
So £1.79 for a pint in Lancashire?
In Lancashire. That doesn't surprise me, though. It doesn't surprise me at all. The pricing is very, very different there, because obviously the institution's got to pay less overheads for rent and staff and so on and so forth. But £8 for a pint in London makes me glad that I'm not a beer drinker.
That is just unbelievable. Well, I'm a vodka man myself. And I'm sure that the price of that isn't going very, very well. But can you believe £8 for a pint? So you do a round with, like, with four of you and it's £32.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
That's a lot.
But hospitality is saying it's going to kill them, right?
Yes, but also hospitality is saying that over the bank holiday weekend they're going to take £2 billion, which is obviously a huge amount of money for an industry which has really been struggling for the last 2 years over COVID. But of course, hospitality businesses won't just be experiencing increases in pricing that they're charging for beers. They'll also be experiencing it from all of their suppliers, all of the food that they're selling. So it's going to be a tough time for hospitality business during this high inflationary period.
It's unbelievable. What should your party, the Conservatives, be doing about inflation, do you think? Are they doing enough?
I think it's a really difficult situation with inflation. Obviously, we've got the independence of the Bank of England, and there are a lot of people who argue that they didn't act quickly enough to raise interest rates perhaps last year and weren't taking it seriously enough. Then we've got the dual problem with that in fact, most of the cabinet ministers in the cabinet at the moment aren't really old enough to know what high inflation actually meant back in the 70s when we had really high inflation, so they're not necessarily in tune with what they could be doing and maybe how quickly they should be acting, because they've never experienced it themselves. You've also got the other third problem, which is we've just come off the end of a pandemic where we've had massive increase in public spending, a massive expansion in the state. I think what we need to see now is a real quest to get back to growth. We need to be delivering those supply-side reforms to increase growth in the economy, increase productivity in the economy, deliver on some tax cuts so that people have got more money in their pockets rather than it going to the state. But also, people do also need support as well for where they can't work.
I cannot get my head around the fact that a Conservative government, the shambles of a Conservative government we have at the moment, I'm afraid to say, think that the solution is to essentially print money and put it into people's pockets by paying their energy bills. It is mind-boggling to me. That is not going to solve inflation. If anything, it might even put inflation up even further. I think that the way in which you solve this, and I think you've just alluded to it, you raise the tax threshold. Firstly, I would have a multi-point plan. I would not be doing a windfall tax on energy companies. I would be forcing them, perhaps through legislation, to invest that money in green and renewable energy, therefore meaning that they could cut the green levies on energy bills immediately, because the energy companies themselves can invest in that using these huge profits, number one. Number two, cut the VAT on energy immediately. I know that it will help some wealthy people, but it would help other people as well.
It's only 5%, isn't it, Cristo?
Yeah, but that, along with the green levy, would be great. And Rishi Sunak is profiting massively from these energy bills that are going up. This inflation is doing the government a lot of good. The government debt is getting smaller by the day as inflation goes up.
It's still £83 billion that they're going to be paying to service that debt this year.
Yes, but the debt is getting smaller as inflation goes up, and I think that is something that is going to make people feel very uncomfortable. And then finally, you raise the minimum tax threshold, you cut income tax, all of that puts more money in people's pockets, but you're not actually printing it and giving it to them, and therefore that would give people help immediately, and also it would raise productivity. You keep more of your own money, you work harder. I mean, it's simple.
Now, I think those are good plans, and I support all of them. But if we just agree with each other, this would be very boring.
Yes.
What the opposing argument would be is that people need money now. They need money yesterday. And we're going to see energy bills raise even higher in October. And people literally can't afford to heat their homes.
But you have more money in your PayPal.
Yes, but if your bills are going up by 40, 50, 60% in October, shaving 5% off your your VAT.
And the 20% green levy.
Even shaving 25% isn't actually going to do
But you shave
that
25% off. Well, firstly, everyone's going to have to face that we all are going to have less money. That's unfortunately, that is not going to get completely solved, firstly. But secondly, you shave off the 25% off bills, as I just described. You give more people more money in their pay packets as well. And I think that that will go further without putting up inflation anymore, therefore making the problem worse. I don't think you solve a problem like this by giving people money and by penalising the energy companies in the way in which they are, because you're essentially we're then still paying the green levies which the energy companies could be paying. So I mean, I don't think we're too far apart in how to solve it. But apparently, the cheapest point that Les has found, he thinks that it's unbelievable that you've got one for £1.79, because Lancashire's cheapest is £3.06.
Gosh, so the Times story is wrong.
Yeah, the Sun is saying that well, that's according to the Sun, but Cooperman is also contradicting that, saying that you can get a sensational pint of Carlsberg in Bridlington, Wetherspoons, for £2.29.
And Bridlington's in Yorkshire, isn't it, I believe?
I think so. Yeah, it is. It is indeed.
So not too far from Lancashire.
Albie, but don't confuse them. Albie, thank you very much indeed. Nice to talk to you, and